officers, Purple Heart members. It's an honor to be here before you all. And, you know, I'm a little bit out of my element because typically I have a Navy guy who's with me. And I served in the Marine Corps, so I can't make any Navy jokes. Like the one last week I did was, he's always quick to point out that the Marine Corps is a department, part of the Department of the Navy, and I'm equally as quick to point out to him that it is part of the Department of the Navy. It's the men's department. And if there are any sailors in here, I may take a few licks on what I'm doing. That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to run. Does anybody recall these comments? America is not up to the fight. We're an all-volunteer force, and we're no match to a battle-hardened enemy after 8 years of war. We're simply not up to it. Our equipment is inferior. We're going to have tens of thousands of casualties. This is going to be another Vietnam. There's no way we can win this. Does anybody recall those comments? 27 years ago, following a man's invasion, many whose name we had never heard of, invaded a country that we couldn't find on a map if we had to. And of course, I'm talking about Saddam Hussein's invasion on August 2nd of 1990 of the peaceful country of Kuwait. And those comments were rendered by the experts in the media and across the world, not just this country, talking about America's better days were behind us and we were not up for that challenge at all. Thank goodness, and by the grace of God, those dire predictions didn't come anywhere close to being fulfilled. In fact, Operation Desert Storm has become one of the most resounding and overwhelmingly successful military operations in our country's history. Sadly, now 27 years later, many Americans, if they think of Operation Desert Shield or Storm at all, it's usually in one of two categories. That was that video game war. It was over with before it started and nobody died. Or they look at it as part one of all of the actions after 9/11 that occurred in Afghanistan and Iraq. Both of those assumptions, folks, are entirely wrong. There are many reasons why this memorial is essential and needs to happen. I just wanted to outline several of these for you here this morning in the next couple of minutes. First and foremost, we liberated a country, Kuwait. I know what you're thinking. Some of you are thinking, oh, that's nice, Scott, but what does that have to do with me? Is it really that important? It was a big deal, and it really is important. And if anybody doesn't believe that, please come to me afterwards outside, and I'll put you in touch with a young friend of mine. His name's Suleiman Al-Badr, and he works at the Embassy of Kuwait in Washington, and he has the distinction of having 2 birth certificates from 2 different countries. I don't know if anybody else in the room can make that claim. I certainly can't. One says he was born in Iraq, one says he was born in Kuwait. It was a very big deal. And it not only changed the history of Kuwait and the Middle East, but it changed the history of the world. Now, the way that Kuwait was liberated is an amazing story in and of itself. You see, we assembled and we led a coalition of 34 countries from 5 continents. If anybody doesn't think that's a big deal, I challenge you to look at today's environment. We can't even get 34 states to agree, let alone come together and, as President Bush said, do what was right, we did what was just, we did what was moral, we didn't ask anything in return. It was an awfully big deal, and it was a very unique point in our country's history. It was also a turning point. Desert Storm was an important turning point in our country's history. You see, our citizens finally came to realize what a tragic mistake it was to have treated so many of our Vietnam veterans the horrible way they were treated upon returning home, and that could never, ever happen again. I'm firmly convinced that if it were not for those lessons learned in Operation Desert Storm, I don't believe for a second There are folks who have been serving in uniform since 9/11, and those who currently serve. I don't think for a second they would be treated with a level of dignity and respect that they absolutely deserve if it were not for those lessons learned. Folks, people didn't come up to you in the airport in the 80s saying thank you for your service. It didn't happen. It forever changed the way that our military is perceived and how those personnel are treated, period. I want to say one more thing about the Vietnam connection, and there are many. But some folks will come up to me and they'll say, Scott, you know, the reason why Desert Storm was such a quick, decisive, and overwhelming victory is because the Iraqis were so bad. Really? Has anybody heard of ISIS? They weren't that bad, but we were that good. And we were that good because all of our leaders were Vietnam veterans, and they were not going to let what happened the first time around happen to us. And I give them all the credit for my being able to be here before all of you to speak today. And if you don't mind, I would like to just take a second. If we have some Vietnam veterans, would you mind standing up? I'd like to recognize you and thank you for leading a please rise. I figured we might have a few, but that's overwhelming. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for leading the way for us. Last but not least, in 1990 and 1991, we had over 600,000 Americans who answered the call to serve. Just like previous generations of Americans from the beginning of our country's founding did. They answered that call to serve, and unfortunately, close to 400 of them made the ultimate sacrifice. I believe that that sacrifice is no less important, no different than any other time in our country's history. It was very, very important. They made that sacrifice, and it needs to be remembered. Those that answered that call should be forever remembered. And I'd just like to challenge all of you, as a national organization, as well as at your state levels, at your local levels, and individually. If you think about it, just think about it. If you come to the same conclusion that I have, that sacrifice and that service is something that needs to be remembered, and that this needs to be forever remembered amongst the other memorials in Washington, D.C. And I would challenge you and invite you to please join us so that we can ensure that this happens. Now, where are we in the process? This is actually in the 7th year. It feels like 70 to me, but it's in the 7th year. Made a tremendous amount of progress. In 2014, May 28th, Congress and the House of Representatives passed the bill authorizing the construction of the memorial by a vote of 370 to 0. Later on that year, in December of 2014, it was signed into law. So we have the law on our side. We're moving ahead, and since then, we've been working diligently and feverishly to find the most appropriate and fitting location in Washington, D.C. And one thing that I did learn, I heard a little rumor about this, and you all might have too, and I've had it confirmed. I always heard there's a little thing called bureaucracy in Washington. And I found out that it's kind of like an octopus, and before you know what's going on, it's got about 3 or 4 arms wrapped around you. But we're moving forward. We're working with the various commissions, and I'm happy to report to you that we should have the site determined by this October. Now, our preferred site is actually located at 23rd and Constitution, which is in close proximity to the Lincoln Memorial, as well as 2 notches over from Vietnam. So we're very excited about this. We are looking to wrap this project up sometime in 2020. Our fallback date, of course, when you're working in Washington, you have to have contingencies, would be in 2021, sometime the beginning of the year in 2021. And that would coincide with the 30th anniversary of Operation Desert Storm. I personally think that there's something off on the timing there, because in 2021, I'm going to be 32, and there's no way that could be 30 years ago. So somebody needs to help me with the math on that. It's escaping me. But we're very, very excited. We're moving ahead, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. As I mentioned, this is a 100% privately funded enterprise. We're a group of volunteers, and I would be remiss if I did not recognize one of our board members here, C. Freeman, right here from Houston, Texas. He's sitting up here at the table by himself. I guess he was a bad boy. He's sitting at the table by himself. But he was with the 82nd Airborne, and he is on our design committee. And I'm going to turn it over here to Colonel West, who I'm honored that he believes in our cause. He is one of our fellow Desert Storm veterans, and he's the kind of guy that, when I first told him about this, he said, whatever I can do to help. And I know you've heard that a lot. I know I have. Any volunteer organization, you hear that. Well, yeah, I'll do whatever I can. This gentleman truly has meant it, and he has been an enormous asset, and just knowing that he's on our side is huge. So I want to turn it over to Colonel West for a few remarks and his perspective. He's a whole lot more eloquent than I am, and a lot smarter than me. So let's turn it over to to somebody that's going to bring us home here. I want to thank each and every one of you for your attention and for allowing me to be here. Thank you so much for your service, and God bless you all. Thank you.
It's always tough to follow a Marine because they just look prettier than us. It's those uniforms, man. But anyhow, I just want to take a few moments. I moved here to Dallas, Texas in 2015, and I want to welcome the National Convention for the Military Order of the Purple Heart here to Dallas. And when Scott and C told me that you guys would be here, and I just recently spoke to the State Convention of Texas Purple Heart, this is an incredible organization. And it's personal to me. Because let me tell you what happened to me when I was 15 years of age. I know that somebody here was talking about Georgia. Well, I'm a Georgia boy too. Okay, I was born and raised in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia, same neighborhood that Dr. King grew up in. And on the steps of 651 Kennesaw Avenue, 3 people sat me down. Corporal Herman West Sr., World War II, Purple Heart, DAV. Lance Corporal Herman West Jr., Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, Purple Heart, DAV, Quezon. And Elizabeth Thomas West, meanest woman you could ever run into, who was a civilian employee with the 6th Marine Corps District Headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. And those 3 people sat me down and they challenged me to be one thing. They challenged me to be the first officer in our family. From that moment on, the next year I joined high school junior ROTC at Henry Grady in Atlanta, Georgia. I finished there, I went on to the University of Tennessee, earned my commission, left as a field artillery officer, went down to Fort Benning for airborne and jump master school, did my first assignment with an airborne unit over in Vicenza, Italy, and then I got orders after my advanced course in artillery to head up to Fort Riley, Kansas, 1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1. Guess what happened in 1990? Saddam Hussein invaded. And there I was, just finished my battalion command, and I was then a task force fire support officer for Task Force 216 Infantry. We had just come back from a rotation at the National Training Center. We knew how to fight in the desert. But we got those orders. And in January of 1991, I looked at my wife, Angela, whose dad was a 24-year Army Master Sergeant, 2 tours in Vietnam, 23rd Infantry Division of Maripal. We just laid him to rest in Arlington National Cemetery last month. Those were the people that influenced my life. And you can just imagine when I get the call from my father-in-law talking about what it means to go into combat. When I get the call from my older brother talking about what it means to go into combat. My dad had passed away in 1986. But Desert Storm was the first test for me. But as Scott talked about, Desert Storm was a bridge. Desert Storm was an opportunity for my generation, for me, to give back to you all from the Vietnam War, from the Korean War, from World War II. So I remember all those words about how we were going to go over there and be the mother of all battles. Well, we whipped their asses in 96 hours. And see, that's what happens when we unleash the fury of the United States military. The fact that we are still monkeying around in Afghanistan for 16 years, and I spent 2.5 years over there. We didn't do right in Vietnam. We're not doing right in Afghanistan. We got it right in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Allow our military to do what they're supposed to do. Take care of our men and women. Make sure they have the right type of equipment. And when we showed up in Desert Storm, not with M113s, but with M2 Bradleys. Not with M60 tanks, but with M1 Abrams. Not with the Hueys, but with Blackhawks. Not with Cobras, but with Apaches. with A-10s, with MLRS. We brought to bear on that enemy the full power of the United States military. And that's what we need to do today. And so that's why I'm behind this memorial. And as soon as I got back, the first phone call I made, of course, to my mom, but then to my older brother. And I said to him, this one was for you. Because I remember what it was like when my older brother came back from Vietnam. And he took off his class alphas and he threw them on the floor in the closet in our home in Atlanta. And I went in and I picked them up and I hung them up and I hung them properly because I respected what my older brother had done in service to this nation. We need you all to get behind this memorial because this is an incredible bridge that shows we transition from that horrible specter of how we treated the men and women who were willing to make that last full measure of devotion to Vietnam. And we need to make sure that we understand what it means. When you commit our military, let them go. Let them do what they're supposed to do. Don't turn your backs on them, and they will bring us victory. This is a hall of honor when I'm standing here with all of you who are willing to make that last full measure of devotion. And you know what that saying is. All gave some gave all. I'm here with an incredible group of men and women. America is not about politicians. America is about the folks that will stand with their right hand and say, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Every single one of us that has ever been in a combat engagement needs to have a memorial in Washington, D.C. Why? So that the children and the grandchildren will go and know what all of us have done in our lives. God bless you all, and thank you.